Boop. Happy Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, September the 29th, 2021. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 140, Esther 8, 1 through 17, Matthew 18, 6 through 9, Psalm 5. You could read Psalm 5, and then Zechariah 10, 1 through 12, and then end with Matthew again. I'm going to go back to Esther and pick up with the story thus far. We've kind of been following around with that. So our story so far, when we last left our heroes, Mordecai had uncovered Haman's wicked plot, and then Esther had been left with a decision, because if you remember, he, told her about it, what was going to happen. This guy wants to not just kill me, but he wants to kill, all of our brethren in the king's domain. And he left her with a decision to make, that she would, are you going to participate in God's salvation? Because remember, he said, I have faith that God's going to do something. You need to ask yourself if you want to be a part of this, of what he's going to do. So would she participate in God's salvation, or would she remain silent and just kind of be a part of the problem? So the good news, or the God news, if you want to look at it that way, Esther did decide to participate in the solution, and wow, I need more coffee. Solution. She took the risk, and she stepped out before the king, because remember, she said, you don't just walk in on the king. One does not just walk in on the king. She took a risk and stepped before the king, and then she invited him to dinner in her chambers. It's kind of a big deal. She's like, my household, my chambers, I'm going to put on a big banquet for you. And he was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll come. Sounds good. Sounds like a good time. And then she's like, and not only that, but I also want to entertain your right-hand man Haman with you. I want to honor you and him in front of him. And he's like, oh, well, that's kind of good. That's a step up, because Vashti, that whole thing with Vashti was bad. And so, he bites. And so not only does she get the king's attention, but it's a brilliant move, because she preyed on Haman's arrogance and vanity, because he's not going to turn down this invitation to dine alone with the king and his queen. My goodness, that's just his social cred just went all the way to 11, where everybody else can only get to 10. So it's a brilliant move on her part. And she sets the trap and then springs it over the course of 2 nights worth of dinners, because this is the part we missed yesterday, because I didn't do the text from Esther yesterday, but she has one dinner, and they're all this is awesome, this is pretty cool, and the king is like, well, what do you want? And she goes, you know what, come back tomorrow night for another great dinner, and I'll tell you then, and bring Haman with you. And they're like, yeah. So they're all primed for this. Haman is just beside himself, and he leaves there feeling pretty good, because Haman's a vain guy. Dare I say narcissistic? Haman is really vain, and he leaves that night feeling triumphant after dining alone with the king and his queen. But this is how fragile people like this are. His whole day is ruined when he sees just the sight of Mordecai doing his job. So yeah, he's had all this great honor poured out on him, and just the sight of Mordecai, who's just a guy who sits and watches the gate, that just is just enough to ruin the day and bum him out. And it's also because Mordecai is not interested in supporting his vanity. He has this really super high elevated idea of himself, that he's just the most awesomest guy he knows, and that he's the most awesomest guy anybody knows, and everybody should agree with him on this, and they should bow and curtsy to him, or quake in his presence. And Mordecai's not having it. Mordecai's like, not so much. Yeah, you do your job, I do my job, we get along. And that just ruined his day, to the point where he gets home, he's completely bummed out, and his wife and friends are like, bro, you got to do something about this. Because, the ancient Persian Empire, they said bruh all the time. So they tell him he's got to do something about it. So their suggestion is that instead of, using his holiday bonus to build a swimming pool in the backyard for the family like he was going to, that he instead build a gallows upon which to hang Mordecai when his plan all shakes out. Build a gallows for this guy that won't acknowledge your greatness. That, children, is what we call malignant narcissism. But the story doesn't end there, because the tables get turned. Turn around, turnabout is fair play. So anyway, Esther turns the table on Haman and his wicked plot, because on the second night, as everybody's feeling great and feeling real relaxed and really open to listening to her, she busts out the fact of what Haman has done and how he has duped the king into not only just unjustly, signing the slaughter of all the, all the Jewish people in his realm, but also has unwittingly signed her death warrant because, well, by the way, I am Jewish, and so the king is just enraged about this. It just ends up badly for him, and I won't go into that because you know what, the Bible is the most published book ever, and you can read the whole story for yourself. Haman ends up, long story short, being the only person to ever use the gallows that he built in his backyard. It's a shame. So he ends up being the only one to use the gallows that he built to hang Mordecai on. The king hangs him on him. So just a good reason not to build gallows in your backyard. And then Esther ends up getting control of all his property. I'm not sure what happened to his family and friends. I'm betting it wasn't a good thing. And then Mordecai gets his job. The last thing the king does to Haman is take the signet ring off of his finger that basically made him second in command, gave him the authority of the king, takes it off his finger, gives it to Mordecai. I'm betting that Haman saw this happen, and that was probably just, at that point, he was probably just ready to go to the gallows himself. So he gets hung on his own gallows. Esther gets all of his property. Mordecai gets Haman's job. And then the king gives, through Mordecai, the Jewish people permission to defend themselves with whatever they deem necessary, whatever it takes, that they get the right to defend themselves against anybody who would dare follow out Haman's orders, because Haman did that under the name of the king, and that couldn't really be revoked. So the king just gives Mordecai the permission to put out another irrevocable, order that kind of counters that one. So it doesn't say if anybody actually tried to follow Haman's orders. I have a feeling that the order went out to all the towns and was read publicly, and all the people who were making plans to attack all their Jewish neighbors in this story. Remember, I said this is also historically questionable, but my bet is that it would have been read publicly, and that all those people that were making plans were like, oh, we don't, okay, well, we'll just back off of that. So it's, the Bible is full of stories of turnaround. It shouldn't surprise you in the Gospels when Jesus is always saying things like, well, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, and he who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven should be the servant of all. Because things don't work out for people that put themselves above everything and everyone else, including God and God's will. Anyway, that's the DBR for today. Get out, enjoy the day. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll talk to you later. Boop.